something interesting is sure to happen. Well, I think you ought to tell me who you are first. Mr. Rabbit? Then why did you ask the question?
Goodness, this is quite extraordinary.
Would you tell me, please, which way I ought to go from here?
But today is turning into the most curious adventure I have ever had.
Welcome, fellow travellers, learners and explorers. I'm Georgia Ellis, and thank you for tuning in to the Alice in Wonderland podcast. Today, I have an incredible guest. I first met Mandeep in London back in 2017, and I've had some really cool conversations with him since then, both talking to him in the car, but also having chats with him. So Mandeep, he's something really special about him. He's the British heavyweight sumo wrestling champion, and he holds a second dan in this Japanese martial art. He has defeated over 35 unique sumo wrestlers. So many of them have been from MMA, Jiujitsu, Thai boxing, strongman, and rugby backgrounds. So that's pretty cool. Mandeep has competed in the UK, the US, Norway, India, Taiwan, and Estonia. And we'll see if we can get him to Australia. I don't even know if we have a sumo wrestling competition here. So let's get curious. Welcome, Mandeep.
Hi, Georgia. Thank you for having me.
Now, when we met, it was about 2.5 years ago. I'm pretty certain you said that I could call you Deep. Is that right? Call you Deep or Mandeep? How do you want to go today?
Deep is fine. Deep is absolutely fine.
All right. So what I'd love to ask you, I kick off the podcast generally with a unique question for my guests. And I've sort of changed it up a little bit recently. So it's got a similar sort of frame to it, but it's a little bit different. So I want you to imagine that I am 7-year-old Alice wandering through Wonderland, and I bump into you and I've got this really serious question to ask you. And I'm a 7-year-old girl and I look up to you and I say, what is it that excites you the most about living in the world that we share today? What excites you the most?
Wow. I have a 3, near 4-year-old son, so I can somewhat appreciate, these inquisitive questions and, that kids have and, how they catch you off guard. But it's such a deep question, actually. It would probably throw me off, first of all, that a child is asking me that. But then in response, I would probably say the opportunity to explore, to learn, to grow.
Yeah, beautiful. And there's an amazing opportunity all around us if we're all willing to look for those opportunities to do all those 3 things.
At every age,
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm going to wind back the clock a little bit because I remember when we met, and for those listening, Mandeep and I actually met because you were a chauffeur at the time, and you picked me up from the airport in London, and we had this amazing conversation. And I soon discovered that you were, a sumo wrestler. At that time, I don't think you had the championship. You were getting close to training for it. Was that right?
I had just got it, actually, and it was your inspiration that led me to creating a social media profile.
There you go. Excellent. So, which is good because we'll get people to have a look at your social media profile once they've finished listening to the podcast, of course. So talk to us, because I loved your story of how you got into sumo wrestling. So could you share, what was it that led you to do what you're doing now in the world of sumo wrestling?
Yeah, sure. I must say, for the record, that I do not consider myself a violent person at all. In fact, and believable or not, I've never actually had a fight in my life. in terms of what you might call the uncontrolled fight. I consider this more to be a controlled fight, if you like. But I've always been a big guy and fascinated by combat sports. Growing up, I used to see a lot of pro-American wrestling, the choreographed type that I think used to be called WWE now. Sorry, WWF now is called WWE, that a lot of people would be able to relate to. And alongside that, I used to, on and off, when they used to show it, watch sumo wrestling on our terrestrial TV here in the UK. So around October 2016, I had a video sent to me, and it showed me these two sumo wrestlers, and they were about to engage with each other. And as the referee cautioned them and got them to start, I saw something that shocked me, made me laugh, and just drew me in a little closer. One of the wrestlers, they slapped the other in the face, and after that, they drove them out of the space, this circle. And with the slap, I thought, ouch. I chuckled a little. I wondered if that was legal, but seeing that the referee had not stopped the bout as a result, I figured it was. But as I heard the commentary and came to understand what's going on, what I found interesting was that this was not done to be disrespectful to the recipient of the slap, the open hand, open palm thrust. It was done to disturb their sense of balance, which happens. We're led by our face and our hand. If that's in one direction, we can't push in the other. And as such, then that recipient was ushered out of the space. And I just thought, wow, this is amazing. As well as the other nuance, and a very key one, which is that as well as to be able to defeat someone by pushing them out of the space, you can also take them down within it. So any other part of their body touches the ground other than the soles of their feet. And seeing this led me to wonder if there is a following of the sport in the UK. So I did a search online. I found the British Sumo Federation in the East Midlands of the UK in a town called Derby. I got in touch. I went to see the gentleman a few weeks on, which was in November, and I was in my first tournament in January, and then March, which is around of when we met.
That's right. It was roughly March. I think it was March 2017 that we met.
Yeah, March, April, I think we met. And I think it's probably worth mentioning here that to the coach's surprise and mine, I actually won both of those tournaments.
Congratulations. with much training. So it was only a short amount. Derby, where's that in relation to where you were living? So what was the journey for you to, was it, because a lot of our listeners won't be familiar with UK. So what was that time-wise for you to get to training?
I live in West London, and I drive. So by road, on a good day, that's about a 2.5 hour drive to Derby, so going north. And it was just the most bizarre experience. Almost like Ellis in Wonderland, if you like. You just don't know what's to follow, but you're going forward, and that's kind of been the theme throughout, really, in terms of just looking to progress at every step. And it's been there 3 years, and we're still with it. With it.
So, do you still train at the same place? Are you still going to? Because you were training at Derby, yeah.
So the coach and president of the British Sumo Federation, Steve Pateman, aka Sumo Steve. He puts on events occasionally when he has the demand. And on those occasions, if one can, they would go up to Derby or go down, go across from wherever you are in the UK. But the truth of the matter is it's not very accessible. And there's not very many events. There's not very many wrestlers. So you could call it somewhat of a niche in the UK. It's worth pointing out, though, that in Japan, where it's the national sport, they too have a very, so that's among the professionals. Outside of Japan, everywhere else, there's about 90 odd countries that do it. It's referred to as at amateur level. In Japan, it's professional. You can only be a professional if you're good enough and join Japan by the age of 25. That's their set rules. But in Japan, it's capped at 700 wrestlers. The whole country follows it, but it's only if you're in the top 700 that you're in. And amazingly, those 700 are split between 6 divisions. And the top division, which is where everyone's sort of attention usually is just 42. Just 42 wrestlers. So if you imagine that in relation to how many participants or even teams that you have in, let's say, the Football Premiership, a more popular sport in the UK, it's a shocking difference, but it just means it's for the very elite.
The very elite, and you're the British champion, so you're very elite.
For my sins, yes.
In a short period of time too, so it was quite it's quite a great journey for you to go on. So what sort of discipline have you had? Like what have you done to get there in such a short period of time? Now, I know you said it's niche and potentially maybe not so many people around, but still you have to defeat people and you have to prepare yourself and you have to train, you have to understand, the rules, what the slap means, all those sort of things. So what have you done to reach that milestone in like such a short amount of time? Like it's not even 3, it's coming up for 3 years now. So
not to give you a wishy-washy answer, but the truth of the matter is I don't know. Someone asked me a similar question, as you can imagine, and when I said the same answer, they changed the narrative slightly and said, well, what do you think someone has to do to be good at this? And in trying to answer that, after a little thought, my response was that I think it's about being grounded, but that being grounded cannot be just about your physicality. It also has to be about your state of mind. And in fact, I dug deeper and figured that it was, for me, more about your values. And so a message emerged from all of this in terms of why I'm doing it, as a form of what I want to share with other people. And that is that we can and must all work to be a champion of values. Because if we can, then that is what truly keeps us grounded and creates a balance in our play, whatever that sport might be, our work and our lives.
I love that you say that, because in a recent podcast, someone said the same thing about having some values that were their guiding force on their journey. So what are the values that you that become your guardrails? What are the values that keep you going, in the sport and in life? So what are the things that have, really being able to shine on the path for you?
So just first of all, a little generally and then more specifically, it did lead me to wonder what my values are. I'm saying this, but what my values are. And when I thought about it, I figured that values, by their very nature, are universal. So you may identify your values and they may be different to mine, but they will complement each other. They will never conflict. As such, one can adopt each other's values, which is a beautiful thing. So with values, if I can just talk a little bit more generally before I do specifically about my own, I looked at this and I thought I must identify my values, but how? And I figured that my values are the opposites of my vices, but also that whatever my values are, by their very nature, values are universal. So they may be different to yours, but they will complement yours. They will never conflict. As such, my values can be shared with you, your values with me. But if I specify my values, by our culture, we talk about 5 umbrella values, or let's go the other way. We talk about 5 umbrella vices.
So before you go into that, can you just share the culture you're referring to? Because some people will listen and some people will be able to see you visually and may understand what culture you're talking about. But can you share your culture, where that's referring to? Yeah.
So I come from the South Asian culture, the Indian culture, although I was born in the UK, but I am Indian by heritage. And those umbrella vices, if you like, that we're told to try to stay clear of, if you like, or manage, are the tendencies to be selfish, angry, greedy, attached to materialism, and to have ego, which is the most subtle and perhaps dangerous of the lot. And so they led me to feel that surely my values, my virtues, my behaviors that I must try to improve upon are those of being selfless, calm, content, detached, and humble.
Beautiful. So talk to me about how those beautiful values of yours intertwine with what you do and how they support you in the world of grounding you for sumo. Because you said, one of the things you realized that if you're giving someone advice around what to do is become really grounded. So your values are helping you do that. So can we unpack each one and you can walk us through how those values play out on the mat?
Yeah, absolutely. So with I don't know if you want me to do each or just a few of them.
Wherever you want to go.
If you look at selflessness, sometimes there's an overlap with all of them, but we sometimes look at ourselves as a body, but I feel very much that we are a spirit. So that message that I shared earlier, that I'm doing this for, to instill in my life and share with others, I figure that's a selfless approach, to think of the sport as bigger than me, and to try and see how I can improve the sport for that sport's sake. Because that's been my background in terms of charitable work, voluntary work, and the pleasure that I get in seeing other people improve their lives and make a positive impact in the world is brilliant. And I really feel that this allows one to channel their energies and bring themselves up a level from genuine and scary conditions in our society nowadays, such as those of bullying, obesity, um, and other mental health issues like depression. Um, that concept again of progress. If someone applies themselves, they can see themselves progress, and it just takes them to a higher state of being. So that's how I would relate selflessness,
Mm-hmm.
as well as, of course, that on a very personal level, my each win I dedicate to the teachings, the life teachings of people who were a part of my physical life, some of whom are still part of that physical life, and some who are now no more. If we talk about, let's skip a few, and anger is obvious. To be calm is much better. You cannot shake hands with a clenched fist, they say. So not to go into a match with any feeling of anger, and then whatever the outcome, typically, of course, if you were to lose, not to be angry at that, but to take that as a sort of learning from that.
Mm-hmm.
So to go in being calm and to be calm afterwards. It's very important, not just to be calm at the end, but to be calm throughout.
So what do you do to maintain, is there something, any sort of practices or rituals that you have that help you maintain your calmness? Because I can imagine if you're going into, especially when you're going into a competition that's got, at on the world stage and you're potentially going for a title, what do you do to maintain calmness?
So, and again, of course, all those five, you could just go on and on and on about them. But if we expand on calmness or composure, there's so many ways, but essentially it's mindfulness that is supported by your breathing, for example. As they say, start with the end in mind. The overlap I spoke about, and this was going to sort of tie in with being detached. So knowing that it's okay if you lose, and that if you win, again, that doesn't define you. That's not who you are. The journey is more important than the beginning or the end, as they say. But the calmness sometimes will be tested, let's say, when you start and someone smacks you in the mouth. It's very easy to kind of have a knee-jerk reaction, and sometimes that's useful. But it's much better to respond always than to react. Yeah. And if you can try and assess the situation and deal with it, then even if the challenge in front of you is greater, it becomes a problem-solving exercise. You divide and conquer, and you look to get past.
I love one of the things that you mentioned there around responding instead of reacting. I talk about that a lot in the workshops that I run. And I think it's a lot of people don't really understand the difference of responding versus reacting. So I'd love to hear what your take is, because you said it really clearly. You want to, calmness comes from a place of you respond when you're calm, you react when you don't. So what's sort of your definition of them both, or the difference?
They're all, as I said, intertwined. The kind of factions of awareness, really. So if you are focused enough, there's other things that you need to be, like hungry and stuff like that. Strong, absolutely. But if you're focused enough, then you might see someone strike before or as they're making it, and be able to move out of the way or absorb that in a way by which there is less impact, or see how you can counter that and use their force against them.
Yeah.
So
what you're saying is a reaction would be something that comes automatically, but a response is if you're in a calm way, you can actually respond to the situation, which means you're actually thinking and planning in that moment and thinking of the consequences, whereas reacting is pretty much just coming from old habitual behavior, potentially things that drills you've been taught would be a reaction. But to be in the moment and to think about something is responding. And I think it's a really nice overlay for people in life in general, like what you're explaining here about your values and the sumo wrestling itself is a really lovely metaphor for life. Because, you know, so many people go out there and they just react to the world, which then creates the anger that you're talking about. But then if they were to stop and pause and think, they get the ability to create a different outcome by responding. So really beautiful. Wise. I knew we were going to have some wisdom come out of you today.
It's you really. I'm just kind of sharing what we had as a conversation back then. I still remember it.
Oh, do you? Excellent. Excellent. That was a long time ago. So detachment, I think detachment is a really good one too. You started mentioning that about, you know, being detached from the outcome, that it really is who we're being in that moment and how we're growing and who we're becoming, and being detached from, winning or losing. It's almost like, did you do your best in that match? Are they called matches? What are they called in
Matches, bouts, whatever
okay.
you like.
Yeah. So if you ask yourself, did I do my best, and be detached from the outcome, I think you can actually remain calm a lot easier. You're right. They're all very much intertwined.
Yeah. I mean, here, detachment needs to be sort of clarified that it's like saying, I am not independent of you and I am not dependent on you. I'm interdependent. So attachment or detachment here relates to materialism, particularly people and things.
Yeah.
So whilst they're there, use them for purpose. Don't abuse them. But know that if they're not there tomorrow, if I had this title, I'm British champion, but it's not there tomorrow, that's not who I am. So that's okay.
Mm-hmm.
So not to attach yourself to, you know, the physical, if you like, but rather the non-physical, which will always be.
Yeah.
So this is where that
so
spiritual.
wise. It's absolutely so wise, because if we think about just life in general, so relationships, somebody breaks up from a relationship and they think that they are somebody because of the other person in their life, but if that person leaves, they think a part of them's gone, but that's not really true. They still are who they are. Or somebody has their house broken into and they have their material possessions taken from them. It doesn't matter.
Yes, in the grander scheme of things, it doesn't matter, because yes, at that time it's a little unsettling, which is but natural. But you have to be able to adapt and improvise and overcome, because the biggest reality in life, in my game, in this podcast, is that life goes on.
Mm. Absolutely. And there'll always be another competitor, another sumo wrestler for you to try and take down, right? So if you can come to life, like you could use life, an opposition on the sumo mat or competitor could be anything in life as well, and how you turn up with that, and using the values that you aspire to are really great values that I think potentially people could look at, and if they feel they're going to work for them, adopt them in their own life. So they were selflessness, detachment, calmness. What were the other two? Because there was 5.
Contentment and humility.
Pardon?
Contentment.
Oh, yeah, contentment. That's right.
And humility.
Yeah. So talk to me about those two.
So contentment, again, there's the overlap there, but contentment is with how you did. For example, in that we all want to be the best, but what's most important is that we are our best.
Mm.
And so if you gave it your best and you didn't get the result that you wanted to get, that's okay. There's another day. If you fell down, you get back up and you go again. It's interesting because in this sport, it can be quite challenging in that it's a best of one. It's a best of one, and it's a self-funded sport. So it's quite challenging when you go abroad, spending all that money, flights, accommodation, everything else. You could lose one match and you're going home.
Mm.
And that the average duration of a match is just 5 seconds. It's really that quick, that explosive.
Wow.
So then to sort of answer to yourself and your family, all of that, all of this money spent, and it's on one level gone to pot, you have to be able to sort of answer yourself before you can answer anybody else. That's okay. I'm happy with that because I've still learned something. It's an expensive lesson, but I've learned something, and I've not given up as a result.
Yeah. I think life is one of the best universities we have, really. And, you're living it, you're grabbing the bull by the horns, and you're investing in yourself, as you said earlier, the learning piece, and you get to learn every time you go to another country, turn up on the mat, ready to go, there's another opportunity to learn. So it's your tuition. It's your tuition fees for doing that. So is there actual prize money if you do win?
At amateur level, Georgia, not very much.
Yeah.
And I'm 38 years young at this time, so I started when I was about 35 and a half. And that's not an age that people would normally start this sort of a thing at, with a family where there is still risk of injury, albeit less. There's a number of things that, we could talk about here. But the fact of the matter is, like we said at the beginning, it's about exploring, it's about learning, it's about growing. That's happening, and that's why I'm continuing with it, because I'm enjoying it so much.
Yeah. So because I remember when we caught up a while ago, you started looking for sponsors so you could get to some world champions. So do you have a selection of sponsors at the moment?
So through my community, I knew someone who's a doctor of chiropractic, and he's been excellent in the way of being able to have, through a global network, chiropractors often be there at international tournaments, not only to support my medical needs, but actually, and pro bono, to support the needs of all the athletes, which has been something. And recently, not only through his own Sports Performance Institute, this is Dr. Jimmy Nanda from Canada, he's actually introduced me to the biggest organization in chiropractors across the world, called the International Chiropractors Association. So they've selected me as their ambassador in sumo.
Congratulations.
So, thank you. It's quite special. So that's basically my major sponsor at this time. And there's others that I have had or am in talks with or hope to secure, as you get the kind of results that you want to, because ultimately for some people, understandably, results create value. But to that end, I've also now got an international medal as well. So it's one thing doing it nationally where there's such a small number of wrestlers and followers, etc. But in having gone to a few countries, as you mentioned earlier in your very kind introduction, when I went to Salt Lake City in Utah, I got my first international medal. That was a gold. That was undefeated. And it really provided some validation. But that's opened a few more doors as well in terms of conversing with potential sponsors.
Yeah, excellent. And you'd be a great ambassador for anyone looking to sponsor someone because of just your whole approach to the sport and why you're doing it, and also the dedication you have to the sport as well. I think you'd be an amazing ambassador for people out there looking to support you. So there was one other value that we haven't touched on just yet, and that was humility. And I think it comes very close to contentment. But how does humility serve you as a sumo wrestler, but also in life?
So, humility would serve me, you, anyone in any kind of challenge, with your wins as well as your losses. Just to see things as they are. So again, as you said, it's kind of in line with contentment. It's all about perspective. It's all about perspective. You know that you're going in to win, but you also know that you can stand to lose. Still focusing more on the winning side, you also then have to remember this is a person in front of me. I've got to be respectful to them. And this is why I really love sumo, because where there's no punching or kicking involved, before you start the match, you bow. After you finish the match, you bow. There's that respect, there's that humility, there's that respect for tradition, the pre-bout rituals that you do, all of that, through and through. Even you mentioned prize money in professional sumo, they do give prize money, but the way in which they take it, it's very easy to sort of think, I did it. But it's kind of remembering that, yeah, okay, I did do it, but it wasn't me alone. There was a greater force at play here. My coach often says that this is a game of confidence. I rather refer to this as a game of Godfidence.
Ah, nice.
So putting your sort of total trust in God. If you're a God-believing person, if you're not, that's okay as well. But as such, remembering that I'm getting this opportunity because of other people, and I must be grateful for that, and give them the due credit, as well as myself, but also give them the due credit, and keep all of those things in mind as well, that I'm representing someone or something, whether it's a sponsor, whether it's a country, whether it's my family, whether it's my values.
Yeah, beautiful. And I was just listening to you and thinking of, could you imagine if a lot more sports sort of adopted that level of respect for their opponents and for the other team? Some sports do, but I think there are some sports out there that still don't do that. They'll try anything to try and defeat their opponents, whether they're, a team sport or an individual sport. So I think it's a really beautiful way, an endearing way of approaching competition. Because I was reading recently and I found this really fascinating. The original meaning of competition, or to compete, was to be able to make yourself better. So the reason I'm competing is not to beat you, but for me to become better. And when I read that, I went, that's a great way of looking at competition.
Yeah.
So for me,
they often say you're competing against yourself.
Yeah.
You are obviously in the ring with somebody else, and sometimes influenced by their expression, their experience, their size, but ultimately you're competing against yourself.
Yeah. But without them, you can't improve. So we need the opposition, we need the other team, we need the other competitor, we need these things in life to compete against. We're not competing to beat them and to become better than them. We're competing so that we can become better, because without that that opposing force to point out our weaknesses and show what we're not doing well, we can't become better. And I think what you're explaining there is actually the true sense of competition, because at the end of the day, you know, you're bowing at each other, you're thanking each other, because regardless of who won, you've now pointed out blind spots, you've now understood your strengths, your weaknesses, and you've got something to work on. So you're continually growing. And I think it's beautiful. If I can have an opinion, I think it's beautiful.
I'll believe it when I see you in a sumo ring one day.
We do. You can get those blow up suits. So maybe next time I'm in the UK, I'll put on a suit and I'll see if I don't know how well I'd be. I'll just stick to what I'm doing at the moment. So you sent me a few days ago a couple of videos of you training, and seriously, these are amazing videos. Now, can you explain? One of them, you were pulling weights, you had weights in your arms, and you had a man on your back, and there was a rope or something. I thought it was amazing. So is this a typical workout for you?
So, no.
You're being honest.
It was just a case where we had what they call a prowler sled that you can push or pull. And in that particular video that I just shared for jokes, I was pulling the sled and so had a harness that I was pulling it with. It was a reverse pull because I was having it behind me, and I was crawling forward, as you'd recall, and I had dumbbells in my hand. The sled itself was loaded with weight, and a friend of mine was actually standing on that, so I was carrying his weight as well.
That's right. He wasn't on your back, he was on the sled. I remember now. Yes.
But what we failed to realize was that this harness had a certain load-bearing capacity. So as we pushed it some way, then it snapped and I rolled forward. So it was a little bit unorthodox, a little more functional, but that's okay. That's okay, because you're still working the mind and saying, I can do this weight. You're still working the body in a bit of a different way, but one way which you can transfer in the ring, because these people are massive, some of them that you face. So what I wanted to share earlier, also among so much that I want to share, but it might be for another podcast, who knows, was that in professional sumo, it's men only, but in amateur sumo, women wrestle as well. And I'm sure that's quite, something for a lot of your listeners today. And it's one thing spectating, but it's a total different thing actually having a go. So I really urge people to do so. Even in Australia, like I said earlier, there's about 90 countries in the world that have federations, and Australia has one too. Forgive me, I don't have those details, but if you look up Australian Sumo Federation, you'll find them online, and hopefully if they're close by, even if you go to spectate, it'll be quite an experience. It'll be quite an experience. But then what happens is, at amateur level, in addition to having sumo for both brothers and sisters, male and female, you have weight classes. You have weight classes, so light, middle, heavy, different thresholds for men to women because of their body composition. But as such, if we talk about men and the category that I'm in, if you are anything north of 115 kilos or 18 stone, you're heavyweight. I'm about 135 at this time. And this is another thing that I want to share with people, that it's okay how much you weigh. What you need to focus on, though, is your body composition in terms of bone, water, muscle, fat. And that even with fat, there is subcutaneous fat, which is the healthy kind, believe it or not, and visceral fat, which is the unhealthy kind. So in getting on not your normal scales, but a smart scales set, which was quite inexpensive, you can get online, I did recently, for about £15. You can identify within that gross weight figure that you see on scales how much your visceral fat is. And if that is over what it should be, that's what you need to target. So
Yeah.
people get fixated with, oh, I weigh this much. It's about how that's broken down.
Yeah.
And
That's such good
if,
advice, because there's so much body image and people starving themselves and trying to do certain things that they believe they're going to be healthy, but at the end of the day, your composition could be really healthy the way you are. So yeah, really great advice. Thanks for sharing that. There was something you mentioned just a little while back, and you said something about it being all, a lot of it's in the mind. And as soon as someone mentions the word mind, my ears prick up, because that's my wheelhouse. I love anyone talking about the mind. But what I'd love to know is, because I think people could use this for anything in life, not just, sumo wrestling. But my question is, how do you prepare mentally before you are about to go into a tournament?
you're asking me to give away my secrets now.
Hey, but here's the thing. It doesn't matter if you give away your secrets, because no one can ever do whatever you're doing the way you do it.
Sure.
If you want to share. If you don't want to share, you don't have to.
Happy to say that's what this is all about. It's a number of things which are personal to me, as I was saying earlier, in terms of selflessness, remembering who I'm dedicating this to, remembering who I am as spirit. So then to sort of, as I was going to say earlier, the thought that you cannot remove or replace these vices, but you can counterbalance them with these values. So remembering my values, a prayer that I say, which is that, God is one. And so I speak to God directly and simply say that, please forgive me, please protect me, please bless me. And then, really just getting the breathing right, so that those 5 to 10 seconds that the bout's going to last for, I'm able to do my best.
Yeah, 5 to 10 seconds.
Very, very quick.
They are very quick, aren't they? I'll have to watch a little bit more of it, I think, just to really appreciate it. That's all that work for 5 to 10 seconds. And sometimes that's a great analogy for life. Sometimes we put a lot of work in and then it's gone in an instant, whatever it is that we've been working towards. So absolutely amazing. So I'm going to close up now, but I've got one thing that I'd love to ask you, because we have, such a variety of listeners that listen to the podcast. From your journey, and it doesn't necessarily have to be your journey from sumo, but anything, do you have any sort of words of either encouragement or advice you'd love our listeners to consider, to contemplate on, to meditate over? Is there anything that you'd like to leave them with?
I think we've actually covered quite a lot of it already.
So if you could pick one of the things we've spoken about, what would be something that you'd like some pieces of advice for people to consider?
So I don't consider myself an authority or in a position really to give any kind of advice as such, but just to expand on general knowledge that I've got from my elders, and talking about this spirit of oneness. We're not able to connect to it sometimes because of our mind. At the same time, we're also able to connect to it from our mind. So the mind is the strongest muscle. And as such, what I would say is, be it for sumo, some of the sports, some of the challenge we're having in our work or personal lives, we must try to identify with who we are, in that we are not, as they say, human beings having the odd spiritual experience when we talk about it or when we go to a church. We are actually spiritual beings having human experiences. So we must know this true identity of ourselves, and as such, not define or limit ourselves based on our age, our gender, our size, our status, our ethnicity, whatever those markers are that people might choose to define or limit us by. We must, in our heart of hearts, believe in what is plausible, because if we believe, then we can achieve.
Beautiful. I couldn't have said any of that better myself. So thank you so much for taking time, because I know it's really early in the UK. So getting up early and jumping in on the podcast with us today. And thank you so much for those final words of advice and things for people to consider. And if people want to get hold of you, follow you, sponsor you, how's the best way they can contact you?
So at this time, I've just got a Facebook page, which, as I said, back in March, April 17, you inspired. And the page is called Deep Sumo. So it's facebook.com/Deep Sumo. Through that, one is able to send me a message and connect. And yeah, so, any kind of support is always welcome. I know a long-term aim worth sharing is that I can actually set up a club here in West London so that this is more accessible to people here. When it happens, I'm hoping January 2020, but when it happens, we will have to see. But if it does, and you are in London again, then Georgia, let me invite you first of all. Please do come and have a look and have a go. But others are most welcome as well.
Beautiful. And there was one thing I wanted to ask you. So thank you for those details. So for everyone, it's Facebook and it's Deep Sumo. So have a look on there. And I might encourage you to put the video you shared with me on that page if it's not there already, so everyone can see how strong you are and breaking the harness. So what's actually next for you? What's the next, I think, are you working towards the Olympics?
So it's not an Olympic sport at this time.
Yep.
But the next Olympics are actually in Tokyo, in Japan. That's in the summer of 2020. So with it not being in the Olympics at this time, it is certainly hoped that they will have some kind of an exhibition match, a demonstration match. So to be part of that would be amazing. In terms of what's next for me, I'm actually flying next week to Japan, the home of sumo, to represent Great Britain at the 23rd Annual Sumo World Championships, which is the biggest stage that there is in this sport at this level. So I'm really excited about that. And that's what we're training towards.
Awesome. Well, all the best, because that's October. What were the dates? Because this might air either before or after.
It's on the 13th, Sunday the 13th.
Okay, beautiful. So all the best for that. And if this airs and it's past, then you guys can all Google, our listeners can Google it and see how you went. So thank you so much once again. It's been an absolute delight and pleasure chatting with you. And I'm sure there were so many different rabbit holes we could have gone down with you today, but seriously, we went down some really beautiful places today. So thank you so much for sharing your wisdom and your experience.
Today is turning into the most curious adventure I've ever had.